In the 1960s, a security guard working his overnight shift managed to do the impossible. He collected evidence of something paranormal prowling the streets. A creature which, up until that point, he had only thought was a tall tale, a legend, or something from a horror movie. Something that wasn't human but wasn't an animal either. And in the years since, more and more evidence has piled up, suggesting a terrifying possibility that our entire reality is under invasion from monsters. Monsters that our parents always told us don't exist. You won't want to miss this one. The year is 1961. The place is Big Rapids, Michigan, a town that not only serves as its county seat, but is also home to Ferris State University. It's a small town, but what it lacks in human population, it makes up in wildlife. You see, on the outskirts of town sits the Hay Marsh, a popular wilderness area known for hunting, camping, and the outdoor recreation. The forest is home to tons of Michigan's native animals, and maybe something even wilder. Now, details are scarce because the story and the photograph that was taken were shared secondhand by the eyewitness's son. But according to him, his father used to work at the manufacturing plant. The plant's property sat adjacent to the Hay Marsh. At the time, his father, we'll call him Gary, was working as a night watchman at this manufacturing plant. And most of the time, it was a relatively quiet job, and it even came with a perk. The company provided housing to the guards just across the street, meaning that more often than not, Gary was able to conduct his business from the comfort of his own front porch. I mean, it was kind of a sweetheart deal. Gary would pass the hours just a few feet from his bedroom, staying alert but relaxed. He would sit on his porch, enjoying the sounds of the night, passing his time reading and sipping on coffee. When it was time, he would get up and cross the street to make his rounds, just to check on the property and make sure that nothing was out of the ordinary. But one night, Gary's shift was anything but ordinary. So Gary was a professional. He wasn't the kind of person to be spooked by wildlife. In fact, on his nightly rounds, he often heard and sometimes even saw all sorts of large animals, from coyotes to even bears. And that's all he thought he would find when he heard something odd around 3 a.m. Something had shaken the chain link fence towards the rear of the manufacturing plant. Gary was sure that if he got up from his porch and went looking, he would easily round the corner, find the trespasser, whether they were a human or an animal, and shoo them away. Well, Gary couldn't have been more wrong. He would not find the trespasser. The trespasser would find him, and there was no way he could have ever scared it away. And so Gary stands up from where he's sitting on the front porch, flashlight in one hand, his unholstered pistol in the other, and he's looking down the driveway to the manufacturing plant, just waiting for the intruder to show themselves. And he's doing everything he can to stay quiet because he knows he has a better chance of scaring off whoever or whatever it is if they're more scared than him. And then finally, a shape appears at the edge of the darkness towards the gate, and Gary keeps his flashlight off, trying to get a read on the intruder, only using the little bit of light coming from the streetlights bordering the driveway. It's big, it's tall, and it's dark, but he can't really see much else. After a few minutes of trying to see what is happening, Gary watches as the figure finally steps into the light, and he can't believe his eyes. He's found the source of the sound, but it isn't a human, and it's not a bear or a coyote. Now slowly, Gary comes to grip with what he's seeing, and according to his son, he was watching something roughly in the shape of a man, but far taller. It was a lot broader across the shoulders too. Whatever the intruder was, it was covered all over in thick, dark fur, and in the quick glimpse that Gary got, he could see that the head was all wrong. It wasn't the head of a human being. This was too long, almost like it had a snout. In fact, Gary could only compare it to the head of a dog or a wolf, plopped on top of a hairy bodybuilder's physique. In short, Gary was looking at a werewolf. Lucky for Gary, this creature didn't seem to pay him much attention. Instead of snarling or charging him, it just seemed preoccupied with whatever had drawn it to the fence of the manufacturing plant. And Gary watched for a few moments as the monster went from standing upright on two legs to dropping down to all fours and then rising back up like a human being. And then Gary did something that he hadn't ever done before in his entire life. He abandoned his post. Instead of shouting or opening fire, he turned around and headed back inside. Now remember, his house was just across the street in a building provided by his employer. Now, disturbingly, there's actually a special food the government uses on their test subjects to keep them from turning. And it just so happens I managed to get my hands on some. Now, I had to be very careful with this stuff because to humans, it could change our DNA makeup. That special food is Sundays for dogs. As you can see here in the video, my dogs went absolutely nuts for this stuff. Not only is it healthy, but it's made from human-grade ingredients, including shape-shifting hormones.
Everything is lies! Everything is lies!
Okay. So maybe Sundays wasn't actually created in a secret government laboratory by a mad scientist, but it was co-founded by a real-life veterinarian by the name of Tori Waxman, who wanted to make a dog food that contained 0% synthetic nutrients and primarily what canines need, which is like 90% meat and like 10% vegetables. In fact, this stuff is so potent that dog parents report noticeably healthier fur, fresher breath, better poops, and more energy in their dogs after switching to Sundays. It's almost like it has a supernatural power. But don't worry, I promise it won't turn your dog into a supernatural bipedal creature. But the best part, unlike other fresh dog foods, Sundays doesn't require any special storage or preparation thanks to the air drying process. Just pour and serve, it's that easy, folks. It's like they used some kind of top secret technology to make it so convenient. Or maybe they just have top secret government scientists. Who knows? So if you want to give your furry friend a taste of this secret government superfood, head over to sundaysfordogs.com and use my code LURKS to get 50% off your first order. Trust me, your dog will love it so much. They might even start questioning their loyalty to you, but hey, at least they won't turn into a dogman. Probably. But Gary wasn't running away because he was afraid. Gary had something else in mind. He wanted proof. After reaching his bedroom, Gary burst inside and made his way straight towards his Kodak Signet 25mm camera. And once he found it, he rushed back outside in the direction of the manufacturing plant, ready to capture evidence of what he had just seen. And Gary didn't have to go far because here's the thing. This werewolf, whatever you want to call it, was headed straight in his direction. Now, the moment he stepped out to his front porch, he saw this thing kind of sneaking down the driveway of the plant. It almost seemed to be using the street line as stations, standing in the glow of one for a few moments before sneaking off into the darkness, only to kind of pop back up into view alongside the next one. When the werewolf reached the third light pole, Gary snapped this black and white photograph of the creature. I mean, what can we say about it? Well, it certainly seems to show something standing underneath the streetlight. The shadows certainly seem right, stretching out to the left behind the pole where the creature is half hidden. Now, Gary's son said that since the lighting conditions were so poor, his father had to use a long exposure method to capture the scene. Unfortunately, this makes it blurrier than he would have liked. As for the figure itself, it seems to not only match Gary's description, but also seems to closely resemble what we've heard from eyewitnesses in other werewolf and dogman stories. I mean, take a look at the head, for instance. It looks like it's set low between a pair of broad shoulders, and you can even see the legs a little, which look oriented backwards, like canine legs. But how tall is this thing? Well, it might help us figure out exactly what we're seeing. Streetlights in America are anywhere from 15 to 40 feet tall, and assuming the one in the picture is on the lower end, it certainly looks more like 15 feet than 40. The creature is over 6.5 feet tall. Now, factor in how it looks like it's hunched over and it could easily stand 7 feet fully upright. I mean, what do you think? I'm on the fence. Something looks a little off about it, if I'm being honest. It doesn't really look like a photograph from the 1960s, and I can't shake the sense that it's been manipulated. Obviously, plenty of people think the same thing and have even run it through software that they claim proves the picture is photoshopped. Look, I've been using Photoshop a long time. I use AI a lot. I claim BS. But it's not up to me. And it's never that simple. Because when he came forward to share the photograph with researchers, Gary's son supposedly provided the original negatives for analysis. Excuse me, negative, not negatives. And this would seem to rule out any manipulation after the fact, meaning that it strongly suggests that whatever is in the picture was captured at the time rather than added afterward in post-production. But this isn't enough for skeptics. Some of them point to the fact that there seems to be a stand or pedestal at the bottom of the picture that the dogman is standing on. This is crystal clear in the picture, leading lots of folks to assume that the figure is just a statue or a movie prop. But who knows? Like the being itself, that shape underneath its feet could be anything. The picture is just not clear enough. And at any rate, according to this story, this picture was taken mere moments before it ran off conveniently into the darkness in the direction of the hay marsh on all fours. Now, Gary never saw it again and rarely spoke about his sighting with his family. And over the years, he would tell his son not to play outside after dark, but that's about all he would say. It wasn't until decades later that Gary shared this picture with his son, who finally released it to the public. Now, whether or not the photograph from 1961 is authentic, sightings of dogmen continue to this day in the upper Midwest. A great example comes from the late Linda Godfrey, rest in peace, her 2006 book, Hunting the American Werewolf. And just 150 miles from Big Rapids, southwest across Lake Michigan, sits North Chicago, Illinois. A suburb of its own namesake, this town is home to the Great Lakes Naval Training Center. And despite being so close to one of America's largest cities, the center is actually surrounded by a lot of woods. Now, this is partially due to the fact that the facility is extremely close to Lake Michigan, meaning that a lot of the shoreline has been preserved. Today, you'll find tons of patches of woodland in this area. Not any real vast wilderness, mind you, but plenty of space for something to roam free and remain hidden. And it was from one of these patches of forest that something horrific appeared in the early 1990s. Over the course of her career as a writer, Linda Godfrey became known as one of the foremost experts in the world on werewolves and dogmen. And because of this, she often received letters from eyewitnesses sharing their own encounters with half-human, half-canine monsters. One of these experiencers was a woman named Emma. You see, Emma was a former member of the United States Navy and, in '94, was stationed at the Great Lakes Naval Training Center in North Chicago. And so as part of her assignment, Emma served in a capacity similar to Gary in our last story. She was an overnight guard, and most of the time she patrolled the Naval Hospital grounds at the center, a route that often took her past the nearby old Naval Hospital graveyard. That's pretty creepy, isn't it? Emma says that she and her fellow sailors like to play pranks on each other. One of their favorite things to do was to capitalize on how their shore patrol route took them by the old boneyard. From here, they would make weird noises at each other, hide and jump out at the last second, or more often, leave a radio among the tombstones. But on the one evening in September, what she encountered was no prank. She was sure of that. Now that night, Emma was one of two other personnel patrolling the hospital grounds. Her partners were Jim and John. Gee, how original. Emma says that on the night of her sighting, she was walking along one of the property's wooded trails that kind of skirts the shores of Lake Michigan, and John was closer to the lake on the other side of the breakers, while Jim had taken up guard duty near the hospital itself. And at some point, Emma radios to John just to give him a hard time. You see, the two of them are dating, and while they would later get married, they're still in the early stages of their relationship. And Emma wants to bust his chops a little, like flirtatious couples often do. And normally, John would have given it right back to her, but something unusual happens. When Emma makes her sarcastic comments over the radio, all she gets back is silence. I guess you could say radio silence. They do this sort of thing all the time. And in fact, the only way to pass the long nights during guard duty is to keep things lively with chatter and the occasional prank. Now tonight, Emma and John have been especially chatty, but by 3 a.m, he isn't responding to any of her messages. He has ghosted her. Again, no pun intended, with the graveyard and all that. That's when it dawns on her. That son of a gun, he's gonna play a trick on me at the graveyard, isn't he? Knowing that this is the most likely scenario, Emma doesn't head to the graveyard, but instead takes a detour off the wooded path to the other side of the breakers, where John is supposed to be. Now, she sees her future husband and calls out to him, but John just stands there. And by now, Emma's confused. It's not a prank at all. John just isn't playing around. When she gets closer, she can see that he is shaking, and he's staring past the breakers into the woods. Now, Emma describes John as a 6'3" strapping Navajo, and says that she has rarely seen him afraid, but that night in September of '94, he was absolutely terrified. Carefully, Emma walks up behind John, the beam of her flashlight splashing against his back. Then, slowly and cautiously, she reaches out and touches him. He doesn't react. He's focused on the woods, his mouth hanging wide open. Now that she is touching him, Emma can tell that he is shaking even worse than she had thought. Emma wrote this.
Now, having been raised in a Jersey Pines, I figured it may have been a little black bear or a raccoon he was seeing. I called him a rude word, as fellow shipmates often do, and shined my mag light in the woods. I will never forget what I saw. It was tall. How tall, I'm not a good judge, but it was taller than John. It had an odd head like a big man, with a dog-like head. I've tried to rationalize what we saw. It was not a bear, as so many people try to tell me, as I've encountered them many times before.
Emma said that her initial reaction to this figure in the woods was that it reminded her not of a werewolf, but instead the Egyptian god of the dead, Anubis. Anubis is a psychopomp, a god tasked with leading human souls to the afterlife, and is famously depicted just as she described, as a human being with the head of a jackal. And so Emma is staring at this creature, unsure of what to do. The only thing she can think of is that there's safety in numbers, so she calls into her radio for Jim to join them to get himself over to their position ASAP. Emma said that the entire time, John keeps mumbling the same word over and over, and he keeps saying Skinwalker.
Skinwalker.
Skinwalker. Skinwalker.
Now, in the time that it takes Jim to arrive on the scene, Emma and John have plenty of time to watch this thing on the edge of the forest. She went on to say this.
I had never heard of anything like that before, and I was just freaked at what I was seeing. The thing didn't seem too upset by us being there. It just stood there with its long arms. I couldn't see the hands, and it had big greeny yellow eyes. It was just weird.
Finally, Jim bursts through the woods himself. He doesn't know why he's been called, only that Emma sounded like it was urgent. Well, the moment that their fellow sailor appears, Emma said that the creature kind of puffs up, kind of like a cat, and takes off, but more upright than on all fours. The sudden movement catches Jim's attention. While he doesn't get a good of a look at the thing as the couple does, He still clearly sees its back as it dissolves into the forest. And that was it. They never saw the creature again, and Emma concluded her story by describing the fallout from their encounter, which, after managing to calm down John, all three of them reported. When they ended their shift, they recorded their sighting in the logbook. Emma said this:
"All three of us suffered weeks of harassment over it. After we both ended our enlistment, John and I moved to his hometown of Farmington, New Mexico. His grandma enlightened me to what a skinwalker is, even though I'm still not sure as to what we saw. John has always been adamant, though. He swears it was a skinwalker. Jim, we lost contact with, so I can't say if it still bothers him. As for me, I would just like to know what the hell it was we saw that night, and why the hair on my arm still stands up when I think about it. This has bothered me for some time, and after reading Linda's interviews about other encounters, I have to say I don't feel nearly as nuts about it now. If anyone can provide a rational explanation for what we saw, it would be much appreciated. For this is one event I would really like to explain."
Not far up on the shore from where Emma, John, and Jim had their sightings sits the Milwaukee suburb of Kenosha, Wisconsin. Obviously, this town has made a lot of news in recent years for reasons I'm not going to get into in this video. As noted by Linda Godfrey, Kenosha has had its share of dogman sightings over the years. In fact, a clear sighting took place a bit further inland near Rochester just a few years ago. And according to the North American Dogman Project, a man by the name of Bob had left his home late one night in March of 2018 for a quick run to the store for some things that his fiancée needed the next day. And it was around 11, and Bob was nearing his destination, which took him up a steep hill alongside Honey Creek. Well, as the hill kind of leveled off and Bob navigated the slight curve at the top, he noticed something that was blocking the road. And it was in the middle of the blacktop, and it took Bob a second or two to register what he was seeing. Bob said that his first thought was, why is that huge dog just standing there? As the animal grew clearer in his headlights, he began to realize that this was out of the ordinary. And now he's thinking, what is going on? That is the biggest black German Shepherd I've ever seen. And so Bob hits the brakes, slowing down so he doesn't hit the thing, and then he flicks on his high beams for a better look. The brightness finally got the animal to move. It was on all fours, and it turned its head to look directly at Bob's car. After about 5 seconds of staring into the headlights, it moved again. In Bob's words, the dog rocked back on its hind legs and stood up on only its back legs. And he would say, "You heard that right. This supposed dog went from 4 legs to a fully upright position, and now that it was standing up, Bob could make out even more details. In short, the physique was all wrong. The legs were much longer than those of a German Shepherd and were heavily muscled. Instead of the awkward frame that a dog would have if it stood on 2 legs, this thing had shoulders that looked more like those of an ape or even a human being. While it was covered in jet black hair, the underside of its body was not nearly as hairy as the rest of its figure. In fact, you could almost see the skin underneath. Beneath this thin layer of dark fur flexed a set of clearly defined pectoral muscles. Its face was also not quite right. Bob said that the light from his high beams let him see the thing much more clearly after it stood upright. He described its head as basically like a German Shepherd or wolf, but the muzzle was wider and resembled that of a bulldog type dog instead of a wolf or a shepherd. Those are his words. Bob said that the dogman remained in this position for a few moments before turning towards the side of the road. Then, like it was fired out of a cannon, he would describe, it took one gigantic leap towards the ditch and vanished. When he reported his sighting, he concluded saying, "I personally felt no fear, just confusion and then amazement at how fast it moved. I don't know what these things are, but I can now see and faithfully assure you they are real." Now, those of you who are Dogman fans may have noticed something. We're slowly creeping our way westward, west towards Elkhorn, Wisconsin, the epicenter of Dogman encounters. And it was here that Linda Godfrey's career began, detailing the stories of the infamous Beast of Bray Road, a series of werewolf sightings that captured the attention of the paranormal community in the early 2000s. Folks, if you know this story, you know the story. If not, well, you should totally check it out because it's crazy. So, appropriately enough, we'll end there. Just 15 miles southwest of Bob's 2018 encounter, John Ward had his own dogman sighting over 50 years ago in Elkhorn. He would say this.
We always heard of rumors of a big dog running around the area of Bowers Road, killing pigs and sheep, but never thought for a second it was something like Dogman. One late summer evening in 1970, my brother and I were horsing around in the hay. We opened a door that they used when filling the barn with an elevator. We were playing around for about an hour when my brother and I noticed something black way off in the hayfield, to the point where you couldn't quite make out what it was. Well, my brother had a whistle he got out of a box of Cracker Jacks. He took that whistle and blew it as hard as he could. And when he did, whatever that thing was stood up and started walking towards the barn. We couldn't tell what it was, but it scared the crap out of us, and we flew out of the barn and ran to the house. We told our dad what we saw, and we investigated it, but didn't find anything. We couldn't believe that it could just disappear like that. My brother and I were convinced that whatever it was in the barn waiting for us.
So, do werewolves or dogmen really exist? If so, why are there so many sightings in the upper Midwest? What is it about this part of America that attracts this phenomenon? While the stories of dogmen stretch back over a century in the region, maybe the creature was imported from overseas. Lots of immigrants who settled in the upper Midwest did come from places in Europe with their own long history of werewolf legends. Places like Germany, for example. Did the immigrants bring over their beliefs, which have taken root here in the United States? Or, even more interesting, were some of these early settlers practicing some form of dark magic that has allowed werewolves, shapeshifters, and these beings to continue to appear today in places like Michigan, Illinois, and Wisconsin? Because all of you watching have reached the end of the episode, I want you to all comment down below. Josh never uses his writer's comments anymore, so it doesn't matter what he writes here. Okay, on a serious note, just write Wolfman underneath this video, and that way I'll know which of my viewers made it all the way to the end. As always, never forget, I love you all, keep an open mind, and I'll see you guys at the very end of the episode. Wait, very end of the episode? I screwed up my ending. And I'll see you guys in... I don't remember my ending. This isn't good. This is unscripted. All right, let's try that a third time. I love you all, keep an open mind, and I'll see you guys all in the very next video.